Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Lottis with the Gaithersburg Community Museum, and this is the third program we've had related to our Gaithersburg History Project, exploring the lives of Black Gaithersburg residents over history. I'm really pleased that we have Tony Cohen again presenting. He's been doing the research on this project, and it is proving quite fascinating for all of us every time some new bit of information comes up. Over time, we will be scheduling additional programs, and we will eventually have a report that will be made public. So right now, I'm going to turn over to Tony and the presentation. It's to you, Tony.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and happy Women's History Month. We hope that everyone who's intended to be on this call has gotten through. We do understand that there might be people who can't get into the waiting room, but in that event, you'll be able to see this when this is put up on the website. So today I'm going to talk about the contributions of Black women to Gaithersburg's history. And I want to say that a lot of the research that I've been conducting has really been with a community focus. And so often when you're or when I am discovering, exploring, researching any history, it's frequently the name of men who appear first and foremost in the accounts. One has to do a careful analysis of that history to see where women are in the picture. So a lot of the community history I've been working on has been really just trying to determine not only what happened and where and when, but who were the real movers and shakers. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the information I discovered, what some of the next steps are in research, and introduce you to a couple of people whose stories I think are somewhat standouts. Certainly my treatment of those stories is only scratching the surface. So please expect more on these change makers, if you will, and more discoveries of other unknown people. All right, let's see if we can get this PowerPoint to work. There we go. All right, so just a little bit about the project. I am working with the City of Gaithersburg to find out more information about African-American origins and contributions to the establishment and growth of Gaithersburg. When we think of Gaithersburg today, we think of a fairly large geographical area. And so that the current boundaries of Gaithersburg, corporate boundaries, not just city center, is what is the area of focus that I'm looking at. That said, going back in time, some of these communities, when they originally formed, might not have been considered part of Gaithersburg, but because they are now, we are doing a deep dive into that history. As you can see with my map here, Gaithersburg proper is in the center and surrounded by satellite communities such as Prathertown and Stewarttown, which is kind of in the middle of present day Montgomery Village. Areas such as Goshen, Metropolitan Grove and Cloppers, bordering Germantown, the Kentlands, Quince Orchard, and also neighboring communities of Hunting Hill. And then more exploration of how the city center, if you will, of or town center of Gaithersburg developed from the time of its incorporation in 1878 to the present. Okay. And if you've seen previous shows, this is a repeat on a slide, just kind of showing you some of the archival sources that I've been consulting, mainly county sources, online sources, and this month I moved to federal sources. I have also been conducting interviews with community members, and hope to have that research completed in April. So in order to tell the story of women and their legacy in Gaithersburg, we first have to look to the formation of the African American community. Most of what I'm going to talk about is the 20th century history of Gaithersburg in just a handful of slides. The previous two presentations have focused on the time around emancipation and early settlement, beginning with enslaved people. After the Civil War, many free Black communities, or as they call them, freedmen's communities, developed around land that had been purchased by newly freed slaves. Some of that land was land that they had worked on as enslaved people. Other settlements formed where people moved either to the area from neighboring regions like Northern Virginia, or move from one area of the county to another. This was often driven by whatever the availability of land was. Certain people would sell property to African Americans, while others wouldn't. And certainly some of the locations of communities were based on kinship ties that went back generations. What emerged on the landscape was a cultural triptych, if you will. In many of these communities, three important institutional structures emerged. You often had a church, a school, and some kind of Masonic hall or social gathering place. While this wasn't unique to Maryland. It certainly was a hallmark of Black communities in Maryland. In fact, as far as we know, Martinsburg, just outside of Poolesville, is the only jurisdiction, African-American, in the state where all three of the original structures still stand. In other communities, some have been replaced and some are just missing. So you see the church at Emory Grove pictured, while other aspects of that community have vanished. You see the school at Pleasant View and Quince Orchard. The church also still stands there, but there's no community hall. In fact, this former school is actually used as a community space in that location. As people began to acquire land, the names of those first founders were put on those spots quite often, and they were almost always recognized to be founded by a single individual or groups of men. The house here near Goshen is the Sarah Posey House. It was built around the turn of the century and is believed to be one of the earliest properties owned by a free Black woman. And that has been the conventional wisdom. But as we go through the records, we're finding more and more that women held land going way back into the 19th century. I included in this slide an interesting document that I came across during the course of the study. It is a segment of a full-page notice from the Sentinel newspaper in 1901, listing all of the properties in Montgomery County that were delinquent in their taxes. And so the practice was to advertise them, usually by the time the advertisement went up, the property owner had roughly 2 or 3 months to pay the outstanding amount, or the property could be sold at auction. And as you see here, there are some names. You have John T. Taylor. He's identified as colored. He has a 2-acre plot of land improved, which probably meant there was a house on it, located in Emory Grove. So too does Alexander Taylor, which may be a relative or the property next to him. But interestingly, we have a Mary Williams, also colored. Further down the road, out of our area of study, but as well, we have Everline Wallace, colored 23 1/3. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. 23 1/3 acre of land, about 2 miles from Goshen. And it says, of this land, 10 acres will be offered as per plat and description to be exhibited on the day of sale, taxes, interest, and costs. And the amount that's in arrears is a little over $11. So we find in the records that women were landholders, but they faced a set of challenges that came with land ownership. Throughout the course of the 19th century following emancipation and well into the 20th century, many of these communities felt the constant pressure of the outside world encroaching. And one of those forms was removal of people from land. So if people failed to keep up with their taxes, they could lose that. Women in the study area were not exempt from this phenomenon. So through the second part of the 19th century, it's fair to say that women emerging from enslavement primarily took on roles and positions of employment that matched their skill sets during bondage, under bondage. By the 20th century, however, not a few women were in our study area, were emerging as business women. Two interesting examples come up. One is for a woman named Dora Dorsey, who was located, her property was located in Metropolitan Grove. And for anyone not familiar with Metropolitan Grove, you know it from the Motor Vehicles Administration. That's where that headquarters is located in our county. No longer a community today. It was at one time an attractive location for pleasure seekers and folks coming out of Washington, D.C., trying to escape the summer heat and looking for a place in the country, if you can imagine Gaithersburg as the country, where they could rest and recreate. The ad you see is from 1910, and it appeared in the Washington Bee, which is an African-American newspaper that was popular in the region. And it advertises boarders wanted for summer at Metropolitan Grove. Good place, good water, and board. Terms moderate, open June 1st, 1910. Further information, address Mrs. Dora Dorsey, Metropolitan Grove, Gaithersburg. And so vacationers would actually take the train out from the city, the Metropolitan line. Some were going as far as Harper's Ferry, but others stopped at Gaithersburg. One account I found among several, I'll read, which describes what the place was like. Metropolitan Grove, Maryland, and this was from a traveler of the time. I arrived Sunday, and I assure you that I am glad to be here. This is a beautiful place, shade all around you. To my surprise, I met one of my old classmates, Mrs. Dora Dorsey, who now is married and has 2 bouncing children. Mr. and Mrs. Dorsey are 2 industrious citizens of Maryland. Their home is the center of what is known as Metropolitan Grove, Gaithersburg, Maryland. We have fruit to give away and vegetables to sell at any price. Mrs. Maxfield, accompanied by her daughter, are the first guests to arrive. The weekend today will find the place overcrowded. This is the place for rest. Sleeping is delightful, and the pleasure is yours if you want it. Our hammock stretches between 2 large chestnut trees. Here I am enjoying the fruits of nature, a medicine for my physician, says, "I greatly need," and it goes on and on. And I've located several accounts of vacationers stopping at this place. The other image here shown is of the famous Black and White Inn in Goshen. It was established on a land at the turn of the century, passed down through the Fraser family. And by mid-century, a couple, Alberta and Charlie Fraser, owned this inn. According to an article in 2004, African Americans who traveled through our county had little opportunity to stay at hotels and whatnot. And they quote, had two choices when looking for a place to stay. One would be sleeping in their cars, or the second at the Black and White Inn. The Black and White Inn was patronized by people coming from across the country. And it was also a popular location with people coming to the Emery Grove campgrounds and camp meetings. Over time, it developed as a center for 4-H activities in the county. And on given weekends, it had a kind of festive atmosphere with activities, including crafting, that guests could do. Eventually, a confectionery was established on the site, and the site remained active until the 60s, when public accommodation laws in the county were enacted, allowing people of color to stay at hotels, the same businesses that were only open to white people before. These are just two examples of Black female entrepreneurship. And as we continue, we're sure to find more. So I just want to bring attention to 3 people. There are many, many stories to tell. For some people, we're just beginning the interview process. So some intriguing tidbits I've withheld. But 3 people I'd like to shine a brief spotlight on. For those who caught the antebellum presentation I did, I mentioned Rachel Ann Johnson in that program. I just want to bring her back for a second bow, if you will. So Rachel Ann Johnson and her family lived on land which is close to or on the property of Summit Hall, also known as Borough Park today. The family probably lived in the back section of the farm, and were enslaved most likely by the DeSelem family. But certainly after emancipation, they remained on the property for some time as freed people. The the census record that you see on the right is from the 1870 census, and it shows John and Sarah DeSelem at the top, followed by Rachel Johnson and her children. There's a number of interesting things about this. There is no Mr. Johnson shown. Recently, I got information on descendants of this family, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to reach out with them and they'll be able to shed some more light. But listed here are 8 children of Rachel Johnson. The other interesting thing, you can look at the numbers and do the math yourself, but she started having children when she was young. And we see her most recent child, Samuel, is 1 year old. So it appears that all the rest of her children were most likely, with the exception of Harriet, were most likely born at emancipation or prior. The period following emancipation was a difficult transition for people. They went from being unpaid labor to and supporting their own families and the families of those who enslaved them, to having to support just themselves in a rapidly changing economy. Rachel was a laundress or washerwoman, and her occupation was common among Black women in the region, many of whom had some kind of domestic skill that they fell back on. In the second and third quarters of the century, those African Americans that we see near the city, near and in the city center of what we would now call city center of Gaithersburg, were domestics, and they were living in households of white families doing their work there. Sometime after emancipation, we know that Rachel had hired out one of her children to work for a neighboring family, the Applebys. And I discovered an account from the Freedmen's Bureau where she filed a complaint against the Applebys for failure to pay wages. The case was reviewed. The Freedmen's Bureau, which was headquartered in Rockville and established to aid newly freed slaves, they ruled in her favor. And so the Applebys were forced to pay those wages that were unpaid. Sounds simple. You have a grievance, you submit it. But the fact remains that even though freedom came, equality hadn't arrived. And so for a woman of color to take on a prominent white citizen and, basically sue him for unpaid wages was a bold move. What we don't know is what the result of that was, other than the award. Moving into the 20th century, we go back for a moment and visit our friend Dora Dorsey, who ran the retreat in Metropolitan Grove that I read to you before. Most interestingly, a notice about her life followed her death in the 1950s in a prominent half-page article in the Montgomery Sentinel. And the title of it, Local Poetess, Work Set for Publication, was the first thing that leapt off the page when I came across this. In addition to Mrs. Dorsey, running her summer accommodations, the paper says that she was an accomplished writer, an educator who worked at various schools over the first part of the century, and a part-time poetess, as they like to say, and that her work was about to be published, and actually published at a local press. I did a little research. Her book actually is registered with the Library of Congress. I'm just trying to find a copy of it. But it's called Happy Moments, The Awakening, and it was published by Franklin Press in Gaithersburg. The article goes on to say that she actually, for her daughter, was actually working on a movie deal at the time to either have her mother's stories depicted in some way or included in a film. The article also says that she was a writer with the Federal Writers Project. And as of yet, I can't confirm that, but it's a tantalizing piece of information. The paper goes on to include some snippets of her work, and I'm just going to read some of this. Miss Dorsey divided her poems into 4 types: pastoral, dramatic, humorous, and romantic. Her work is simple, almost crude. She writes of such unlikely subjects as cleanliness, a health rule, trouble at home, and the automobile. And here are some passages. Have you read of the desert bear? Glacial action left them there. Glaciers were borne away by heat, and glad they were to make a retreat. Thus, does the poetess frequently draw upon strictly scientific data for her work. To have a few pennies and really save, but we should save a small sum for a ripe old age, and have a few pennies when depression waves. Speaking about the economics of the time. This poem, referring to the next, is listed as humorous. While I lay in my bed at night, some little poem might pop in sight, telling me what I want to know, asking me to begin to sow a seed that will help you grow, sow a seed so the world will know. I will be your guidance near, then I'll know you, think of me, dear. So there we go. According to the story, 1,000 copies of this book were printed. So I'm hoping that someone who's watching now is actually reaching on their shelf and pulling off a copy to share with me. So let me know if you know of this book and how I can take a peek at it. All right. So the next person, I did a 19th century person, a 20th century person. Trust me, our next person is a 20th century person, but she's a 21st century person. This is Mrs. Ida Pearl Green of Quince Orchard. And I believe she will in June be 105 years old, if I'm doing my math right. She was born in 1918, and she is the patriarch of the Green family and also of the Pleasant View community. She's pictured here with her grandson, Jason Green, who captured her story and the story of their community, along with his sister, Kisha Davis, in a film called Finding Fellowship. If you haven't seen it yet, you must see it. It really tracks this one American family and their community from the times of enslavement to a very important event in the civil rights movement that happened right here in our county. So I'm going to leave it at that. Mrs. Green was born not far from Quince Orchard, where she grew up. And as a young woman, she became an entrepreneur. Like Dora Dorsey, she had some kind of local business savvy. I don't know if it was in the water or just something that she was blessed with from birth. But it seems that she was always working and innovating. As a young woman, she became one of the top sellers of Avon products in the state, before going on to work in other professions for organizations like National Geographic and the Department of Energy. Like other contemporaries, she fought and keeps fighting to preserve the history of her community, holding those memories like treasured objects, but also wanting to share them with people today. I am going to, if I can get this to work, just show you a video that features Mrs. Green.
Resident Ida Pearl Green is 103 years young.
I'm feeling wonderful today. So glad to be alive and out in the beautiful sunlight. It's just wonderful.
Her family organized a birthday car parade to celebrate her at Fairhaven United Methodist Church in Gaithersburg.
This is a blessing, 103 years young. Yeah, she's really vibrant and we just love her.
I'm glad that God has blessed her to see 103 years old.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that He will allow her to see even more.
She's a really remarkable person. Very remarkable. She's had a lot of sickness, but she always seems to recover and can come back.
The family is very happy that she's reaching this milestone, 103. We love her and we just are grateful that we're able to share this time with her.
Green's family also held a car parade for her 102nd birthday last year, a few months into the COVID-19 pandemic. She is glad things are closer to normal this year,
Very happy to be without a mask.
and she is still giving back to her community.
I keep trying. And I love making shows for senior citizens. Anybody that's sick. I make little slippers for the senior citizens.
Green has advice for others who want to live a long, successful life.
Just be friendly. Meet everybody with a smile. How wonderful it is to be alive.
In Gaithersburg, Mariam Shazad for MyMCM.
If you find our videos useful to you, like, share, and subscribe to our channel.
Tony, was that sound only or was it a video?
Oh, you didn't see the video?
No,
Okay.
I think you have to close the slide.
Okay. All right. And close the slide. Apologies. There we go. Look at this. Here we go. Well, apologies. I actually tried to embed that video and it made my PowerPoint disappear and I had to rebuild it. So apologies. And you can find that video online, and I'll see if I can drop it in the chat. All right. Do we want to open it up for questions?
Yes, let's open it up for questions. You can put your questions in the chat, and every single one of these presentations, we've had a few little technical glitches, but we've powered on. And I do apologize for that. Are there any questions? Arnetta, here, let's let me I can ask you to unmute and you can just ask the question.
Great.
work?
I just wanted to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to say Payne Dorsey is my great grandmother. And yes, and I had a copy of her book,
Yes.
but unfortunately mine was lost. But my aunt still has a copy. Her
That's
granddaughter
incredible.
is 90, she'll be 96 this Sunday coming.
How do I want to take you and your aunt out to dinner.
Oh, that is so precious. That is so precious. What I would like to do, if it's okay with you, they're very, very protective of her because of the COVID virus. You can understand that. But I like to let them know, meaning her children and her, that I have talked to you and that you are interested in sitting down with her. So that's very special to me because, especially the article, because I wasn't aware of that. So I'd like to do that if that's okay, Tony.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming that Karen can see you, meaning she has your contact because you signed up for this.
Yes.
I can send you, all the documents that I found.
Oh,
share those with you. Yes, we'll find a way, even if it's virtual, even if I send DoorDash your dinner via DoorDash and we talk via Zoom.
Yeah, we can always set up something virtually too, through the museum
This is
account.
very exciting.
We
Thank
have
you very much.
so that we can talk longer, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yes, I would love for her, I don't mean to take up so much time because I know other people may have questions, but I would love for her also to visit the museum because she can tell you so much about old Gaithersburg.
Oh, yeah, that would
And
be incredible.
being with my great grandmother, going with her to teach in Clarksburg, and just the different stories that she loves to tell about that. So in Metropolitan Grove, as you know now, defunct, was a very vibrant community, extremely vibrant. So it's
If
something.
I was gonna say, if she would feel up to walking around what, Metropolitan Grove and just talking about what used to be here or there would be unbelievable, really.
It'd be so special. The thing about it is, as you know, you do know where it was located,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
And it's really difficult, in that area to walk around. But what I can tell you is, the impound lot, if you go about, let's say 100 feet past it, that was my grandmother's backyard. So
Wow.
Hurricane Dorsey's backyard. I do remember that as a child.
Wow.
And some of the family that still lives. I mean, it's a lot. Old Emery Grove can help a great bit too. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
made
you.
my
That's
day.
incredible.
you all made my day. You have no idea.
A pleasure.
Does anybody else have questions?
I see the message from Sylvia, right down the road from MVA, and had no idea of the history. I always try to think of the history when I have to go to MVA for something. I can't say it helps.
I know, not everybody's favorite place. Well, we'll be sharing this video both on the museum's Facebook page and on our YouTube. And eventually there will be a website that's going to have all this material. So
Fantastic.
if nobody else has any questions, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye,
Bye.
everyone.